Unconventional Soldier, a military podcast brought to you by two British Army veterans in association with ISAR.com.
Welcome everyone, and thanks for downloading another episode of the podcast. Our guest today is Adam Lyle Stirling, who serves as an infantryman in the British Army from 2001 to 2012. First and second Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, then in 1st Royal Irish Regiment. Adam completed op tours in Northern Ireland, Iraq and Afghanistan, finishing his service as a sergeant. And on this podcast, we're going to be talking about one of Royal Irish's tour of Afghanistan in 2010. So it's great to have you in the pod, Adam. And can you start off by telling us what made you join the Army, why the infantry, and why 2 PWRR?
Hey guys. Well, firstly, thanks for having me on as a guest. It's an honour to be with you guys today, especially with some of the podcasts that I've listened to from people over the years who've served. So really, for myself, I was 17. I was living in Bognor Regis. I was going to Chichester College. I was studying to be a chef, kind of a little bit lost in life, following my mum's footsteps. And really, for me, I was sort of very disinterested. So I decided I wanted to get a job, and I ended up actually in the careers office. And this was back in the day in the early 2000s, when they had the boards on the wall with the little crib cards, if you guys remember them at all. And on there was this little printed out card about the Army, and there was the basic wage on there, and that was my initial interest. I think it was 16k a year or something. I'm not sure, I can't really remember, but yes. So I spoke to a lady, ended up in Chichester careers office with my mum after a few arguments with her. She tried to steer me away from it, but I was completely intent on doing it. And then I met a sergeant, a recruitment sergeant from PWRR, and he kind of explained to me, as they do, they used to get a cartoon out in the day in front of young teenagers and say, listen, this is what the Army does, and break it down from back to front on the battlefield. And I just said, infantry sounds like it's my bag. So yeah.
Do you have any family history of the Army?
My great grandfather served in the First World War as a captain in the Argyle Southern Highlanders. I believe he was in the Battle of the Somme. But yeah, that's it in terms of family history in the military. So yeah, I joined in 2001, training, passed out December 2002 from Catterick, and ended up sort of in a rifle company, A company. I enjoyed it. It was fun, but I wanted something more. And I remember going out to see a demo on the back training area of the recce guys in an OP, doing contact drills, etc. And this was really the beginning of my love for recce and my career in the Army. And through most of my Army career, I ended up back in the recce platoon at one rank or another until I left. A couple of tours in Northern Ireland. There was a 6-month tour down in Portadown, and then out into Besbrook Mill. I don't know if you guys remember Besbrook Mill from your service at all.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah, sleeping in that QRF hut next to the HLS, or trying to sleep next to the HLS.
You had a hut?
Yeah, well, kind of. We used to actually, so whenever the new guys came to the platoon, we were going out on a helicopter patrol, you might have done this, we used to give the RAF helicopter pilots notes with some particular choice words on them about what we thought about the abilities of RAF pilots. And we'd soon sort of take off and cover the grounds in more of a tactical pursuit towards the first drop-off, and you'd see people throwing up in the back of the helicopter, which was quite fun. But that was kind of what we got up to, really. It was a good tour, a good experience. I think you learn a lot on your Northern Ireland tours, and it's stuff that really transcended through to what we've done on later operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, which I'll come on to later. But yeah, then an Iraq tour, which was sort of based out of Shaiba Log Base, and then up into Baghdad as well, which was interesting to get up there and see that and work with the Americans out of Camp Victory, doing sort of I'm more of a PSD deployment to 2 armoured vehicles, taking the generals about from Camp Victory up to the Green Zone and back on daily runs.
Was that a significant change of pace compared to Basra at the time, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, it was very, let's put it this way, Basra was out on the ground constantly, GDA patrols, convoy, force protection, or you were to do with the prison. So there's a lot of guarding the prisoners. So that unit was dedicated to those roles. And then the guard of Shaiba Log Base. So you were at it all the time. When we went up to Baghdad, it was pretty much a couple of runs a day, and that was it. Hit the gym, and there was a bit of a social scene up there as well, with the Brit House and all the brigade brigadiers would go in there and there'd be this fridge full of beer that suddenly got stocked up all the time, and you'd look around and see all the brigadiers and colonels drinking a beer, and they'd go on, have one. And then it kind of was quite an eventful little house, let's just say that. I won't say too much. But a good time was had. And then Northern Ireland on a residential 2005 to 2008, and then within that tour I decided to complete the COP platoon course. So I was in COP for just shy of 2 years, which was great, which is kind of, again, pretty much, you guys will probably know of it, but similar to that of reconnaissance platoon, working in small units, doing operations. I can't really go into much detail on the operations because of the Secrets Act and such, but it was very high level stuff. We were working with some pretty specialist agencies as well, supporting them, and that really gave me a wider look at the bigger picture.
Just for our non-military listeners, Adam, the COP that Adam's referring to is Close Observation Platoon, and it's a specialist skill applicable to Northern Ireland.
The course actually in Liddon High, even though there's no hills there, it's probably one of the most arduous courses I've done in terms of fitness. There's a particular 8-miler that involves a lot of shingle and stretchers and Bergens. That's I probably still have nightmares about that one, to be honest. But as a team leader, it was a good course, and I really learned a lot about being a commander at a lower level with a smaller unit in that period. And then Junior Brecon as well, which was great. I enjoyed that, but the course I enjoyed the most was Senior Brecon, really, because I'd spent 2 years before that as a section commander training recruits at Catterick, taking them from day one to the end of the 6-month training process, punching them out ready to go to the units. And that was really rewarding, taking these guys in and teaching them everything to sort of enable them be at the base level required, let's say, to get to their infantry units, and be an asset to them. And then obviously, you guys know yourself, you're at the base level, you get into your unit, you do further training, you go off into maybe a rifle company, or later in the stage they'll go off into support companies, whether it's machine guns, javelin, recce, snipers, whatever. And then, as I said, Senior Brecon was the best course for me. I loved tactics. I was really fit at the time. I was training to go on selection, so my mind was focused on that. And that's that. And being it, I would say, for junior NCOs who spent 2 years at Catterick, where you're continuously going through the process of section attacks, platoon attacks, company attacks, day in, day out, and you go on Senior Brecon straight from there. I found that I was very fit, but I was also able to do the course. I wouldn't say it was easy, but I just found the command appointments there was a natural flow that I saw a lot of the other NCOs that had done time at Catterick sort of had in them as well.
And that's about 3 months long, is it, Adam? Senior Brecon?
It's 3 months long, Senior Brecon. So you've got your tactics course before, and then you've got the live firing course before, so you can become a range controlling officer to do like live fire maneuver on the ranges, right the way up to platoon attacks and stuff like that. So that it's a great course, and it's kind of the foundation of getting the base level for what a great platoon sergeant should be within any infantry regiment. I would say if you can administrate yourself in a platoon in a woodblock on the side of a hill that's pretty much acting as a windsock with sideways rain, and you are hating your life, then you could administrate a platoon anywhere in the world on any battlefield. I would say it prepares you for everything. And then to sort of the Royal Irish at that stage, and basically I decided at Catterick that I wanted to transfer and I wanted to go to the Royal Irish. There was a family tie there with my family coming from Ireland, and there was also a sort of a relationship situation with a previous wife, and geographically it just fitted perfectly for what I was looking for. And the regiment were going on an operational tour, which I wanted to be a part of as well. So I kind of put in my application and got accepted and went to the Royal Irish pretty much straight from Senior Brecon after Catterick.
Did you go as a sergeant or a corporal?
Yeah, I got promoted transferred across while I was on Senior Brecon, and then I got promoted to sergeant. The battalion RCO called me up at the first week of the Rangers course after we'd finished tactics, and just said, look, you've been promoted to sergeant, basically, which was great, and gave me a slot within the recce platoon as one of the two sergeants. So you normally have, as you guys remember, you have two platoon sergeants within reconnaissance platoon, a colour sergeant who would be the second in command under a captain, and then a multitude of corporals as team commanders.
You're treading on some toes there a bit,
Not so much. I mean, I went to do the pre-seniors course with the Royal Irish, actually, from Catterick, and I kind of rocked up and everyone was a bit like, who's this guy? But I was in the top two on pre-seniors. Cleansed it with another guy called Danny, who became a really good mate of mine, actually. Danny, we went through seniors together. We did the tours together. We went on selection together and stuff. So, and they're a really great unit and a family-orientated unit. And I was really welcomed into the regiment with open arms and looked after, definitely.
Did you find it very different from PWRR?
The character of the regiment, I would say, for sure, definitely, because they're a bit more, let's say, the Royal Irish are a very professional, highly experienced unit. They've done operations like Telic 1. They were there across the border, went right the way through. Some of the guys went right the way up to Baghdad. Then they've done 3 almost back-to-back tours of Herrick, everything that happened before that as well. So the regiment is very, very experienced operationally. There's a high level of maturity within that regiment, but there's also they're a mixture of sort of the Irish, the Northern Irish, Manchester, Liverpool, Brummie. It's almost hard to describe it. It's a kind of a little bit boisterous in there, but in a good way. It's hard to describe it if you're not part of it. It's very different. I heard there was a video recording of an American sergeant, and they said to him, like, one question of this interview they said, "Who's the craziest soldiers you've ever served with?" And he said, hands down, the Royal Irish Regiment, without a shadow of doubt. Those guys are lunatics, so. But it showed on the beer, definitely, but it also showed on the battlefield. They got it done from right the way down to the youngest ranger within the regiment. And I think this probably leads us on quite nicely to talking about that tour. Actually, have you guys got any questions before we move into that?
Yeah. You wrote to us to ask us to come on as a guest, and the phrase you used was you wanted to tell a unit story.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
why was that so important to you?
So the tour, the intensity of the tour for me and for the guys that were under me, and for the guys in quite across the company that we were attached to, which is B Company, and the wider regiment, I would say, it's something that wasn't documented so well, I would say, or shown back here. Nobody really knew what we went through. I mean, we had press come out and in bed with us when we were back in Bastion about to go on leave, but it was not really a proper overview sort of given to anyone back home. And I think after the tour, having the regiment itself, has had multiple people take their lives since that tour. PTSD. Me personally, Andy, my point man, took his life in 2016, and that really hit me hard, and it hit the guys hard as well. And during the tour as well, I'll come onto it in more detail when I talk about the actual operations side of it. But I had to CASEVAC guys for mental trauma during the tour because of how kinetic it was and how much we were under the cosh in terms of enemy action against us, both in and out of the compound. It just destroyed the mental capability of people.
It's funny you should say about that, Adam, because at the start of the podcast, we were talking offline. I was saying that I was working out there as a contractor for an aerospace company. And I was coming back on a flight and I met the padre, who was the padre of my old regiment. We're delayed as you normally get. And I sat talking to him and he was telling me his part as a padre and the strain on him having to deal with a load of guys who are undergoing those mental pressures that you're talking about. Yeah. Guys that didn't want to go out on patrol. And he's sitting there giving them sort of, not spiritual guidance, but he was somebody they could offload on without fear of anybody else finding out about it. And it was a huge strain on him when you could tell it, you could see it in his face.
Our padre, or one of the padres, actually got sent out on patrol with one of the platoons, and he got in a contact and he had a huge backpack. He had a day sack on his back full of link, and he fell on his back like a turtle while the guys were in a ditch returning fire. And one of the guys looked round and there was the padre with his arms and legs flying around. And I mean, it's funny. It's funny now, but
not what the padre thought he'd be signing up for.
The padre was not impressed. Let's say that. The company commander got a few choice words when he finally got back to the company fob, but definitely. But you're right. And for me also, you can't, as a forward deployed infantry regiment, who's involved in kinetic operations, and you've got limited resources, you've got people going out on R&R, you've got casualties that have already gone out, you're already stretched, and then you've got platoons that are deployed to different areas, and then you take over new areas, and the company commander has to chop down the size of the platoons, put people together to fill that new compound and to dominate the ground, as it were, by day and night. You suddenly start to get really stretched, almost elasticated out, and that can have an effect. And then you have to try as best as possible to keep the mental motivation of the guys and not to lose people as best you can to trauma, let's say, and keep them motivated and keep them in it, because it's, it's just like when they go, it's effectively extra time on stag, extra this, extra work, extra kit, extra ammo for the other guys to carry, and it becomes a burden. But it's part of what operations like that are.
It's interesting though that even in World War II, an infantry company or an infantry battalion normally only ever did 6 weeks on the line, and they're normally rotated out after 6 weeks for a couple of weeks in the rear. And certainly that was, as you've just described in Afghanistan, that was never the case. You were in contact with the enemy pretty much for your full tour, apart from your R&R.
Yeah, I mean, I think the company, within the first 2 weeks of our tour, we were in 146 SIGACs, just my multiple, so 146 engagements in 2 weeks. So if you can imagine, in the day and sometimes in the evening, that's continuous effective enemy fire on you on the ground or on the compound when you're in it. So
Was this a summer tour, Adam, or
started September, the tour, so I'd say back end of the summer going into the winter. So the first sort of 3 months were very kinetic on the tour. The second, the fourth month kind of dwindled a bit until we started prodding into new areas where they didn't want us to be, and they'd sort of react and come out and have a scrap with us. And then as anything, when there's no cover, the Taliban don't come out and play. So for the winter, then a lot of them probably go back over the passes into Pakistan to the villages and whatever in the winter months, right? And they come back when they can move around have a lot of freedom of action due to the natural cover that's provided for them, especially in an area like Nadi Ali. So Nadi Ali itself, where we were based, we were in an area called Balakan. So you've got, if you look at Lashkar, or if you understand where Lashkar is to the sort of north, Lashkar is like the capital city of Helmand province, right? And then to the northwest of that, you've got a large area of green in the desert, basically, that moves down from the northeast right the way across the northwest and down past the south of Lashkar. And that's basically because of a natural flow of water, main body of water that moves through there. And one section of that, which is to the northwest of Lashkar, is Nadi Ali. And where we were based, so the whole regiment itself, you had to the northeast slightly, there was Fob Shorkat, which was the battalion headquarters, and then you had the rifle companies sort of placed out clockwise all around in the area, and then basically where we were, B Company, we were in the very north part of Nadi Ali, the green zone, and there was an area to the right called Nagelabad Calais, which was just north of Nadi Ali, and that was kind of the start of Free Parazeo. So there was the desert, let's say, and then, or the dash as they called it, there was a canal, and then there's the green zone. And for, let's say, 1.5 to 2 kilometers from west to east, and then from north to south about 3 kilometers, you've got sort of B Company, 1 Royal Irish AO, which is bordered to the northeast by Free Parazeo, and then to the southwest by another one of our rifle companies, and to the south you've got battalion headquarters and another rifle company. So we sort of moved into that area, and just to the northeast of that area, as the desert started, you had the company headquarters, which was PB Pimmon. So in there was the company HQ, some support elements. You had the CQMS, or the company quartermaster, who was essentially, as you guys know, but for the listeners, in charge of all the stores, getting out everything to all the platoons on the ground, like ration resupplies, ammo resupplies, lock stock, whatever they needed. And you had sort of the quick reaction force under the company sergeant major that was in there, vehicle borne, could deploy out to, in some cases, situations on the ground. But unfortunately, a lot of the MSRs were IED'd by the Taliban. So it's hard. Vehicle maneuver was quite difficult. To the south of PB Pimmon, then there's a route that goes down. There's a major junction, so we tended to be, as platoons, placed on major junctions on MSRs to dominate that area, and you provide sort of ground domination patrols around that area and try and keep that route open as much as possible. That was one part of the requirement for you operationally. So there was a platoon in there, and we were east of them, approximately 2 junctions. So we moved into a place called Shingle Calais. So basically, as you guys probably remember from doing tours, when you go to take over a platoon house anywhere on operations, what happens generally is the incoming commander will go in 24 hours before his men and basically conduct what is known as sort of a handover. And the handover essentially is you spending time with the commander inside the compound, map briefs, talking about everything, the situation on the ground, what's going on, the local population, as much information as he can really get to you, enemy action, getting up on the walls with him or in the sangers and him briefing you on enemy firing points, that kind of thing. everything, and spending some time where possible to get out on patrol. So when I got in there, you got the Scot, I think it was one Scots, outgoing, they're tired, they're very kinetic tour. You've got attachments, artillery attachments to them. They're just outright refusing to go out on patrol. You could sense really that all the guys that were there were mentally done and they were ready to go home, and nobody was really wanting to take any major risks at this stage. So I was kind of given the lance corporal there and about 8 guys to go out on patrol. And when we went out on the patrols themselves, I was expecting to hopefully cover quite a bit of ground, but they took me kind of probably 100 meters north, then west, south, and then back into the compound, hugging irrigation ditches, staying very close to cover and getting back in. And then that gave me a bit of a picture. And while we were in there, and also before we went down with all the imp briefs, this was the most kinetic platoon house in the regiment. And they'd only been in there just shy of a week. And as I was sort of sitting eating with the guys, they pointed out on the wall of one of the internal buildings in the compound that basically an RPG had been fired and come over perfectly in and just hit the wall above where the guys were eating scoff. There's a small compound of about, let's say, I'm just looking at it on the map now to refresh my memory, but about sort of 30 meters by 20 meters, if that. And you've got walls that are approximately, let's say, 15 feet high, and it's made of straw and cow pat. But it's thick, they're about 1.5 meters thick. They're solid. They can take a hit from RPGs. They can take a hit from small arms fire. And what the guys have done in that compound is they've essentially built up 2, we call them sangers, but they're for all intensive purposes watchtowers on 2 apexes of that compound. So one in the northeast, one in the southwest. And, the way you build them up is you build them up with sandbags and you crisscross them, and then you use to a certain level. So double layered. So by double layered, I mean front to back. So you've got extra protection. And then you use what's known as concertina wire, which kind of looks a little bit like the soldering iron wire for the listeners. And you use that to sort of secure it even further. Then 6-foot pickets tied into that, some hard cover, i.e. metal sheets that the CQMS had provided them, and then sandbags further on top of that. And then you would put camouflage nets and a bit of a backdrop with other sandbags hanging down, empty sandbags, to kind of break up the silhouette from an outside looking in perspective of guys that are there. And the reason you need to obviously break up those silhouettes is because the enemy are known for having sharpshooters. They can get quite close in the green zone because of the large amount of high level cover that's provided by the foliage.
The term sharpshooter and sniper is used a lot, thrown about a lot.
Yeah, of course.
Were these guys genuinely quite good?
Had a guy shot in the helmet in a super sanger from probably close to 1 kilometre away. We were having, in the other area, Mazroof, that we moved up to, we were having shots taken at the sanger aperture at night with a 7.62 long range rifle. We had definitely had an individual in the group of the enemy fighters that we were dealing with who was highly trained and skilled in long range shooting, for sure, because he hit a guy in the body armor, he hit a guy in the helmet. And these are guys that are in sangers with quite small apertures with, it's very dark, it's hard to see them. So it takes a particular skill set, I would say, to be able to identify that and then also hit that at range, definitely. And these are foreign fighters, for sure. We obviously killed foreign fighters from Pakistan and outside of Afghanistan, definitely. So yeah, that was the situation. My guys came in the next day. They arrived. I kind of bedded them in as was the standard. The outgoing guys left. Get them up basically on the walls, and on all the walls, and you give them a breakdown of the ground. That's the first thing, and then bed them in, get people on rotation on sentry. Then you just start to plan what needs to happen. So we have like a small room where I slept, which had what we call the command room. So there'd be a radio in there that was direct contact to company headquarters. I made a point of adding also handheld radios. The commanders' radios, have got extra ones, and put them in each sanger for when engagements would happen, so that the person who was or the second man inside each sanger could send a contact report straight away, as opposed to having to shout down or call over on a PRR to whoever was in the command room, let's say. So that commander could then get up and be a part of that engagement and start to coordinate more effective fire, maybe think about utilising mortars or whatever if we needed to at that stage of the battle intensified enough. And then what we needed to do really was get out on the ground and conduct at least 2 foot patrols a day. It was about ground domination. As it was, where that compound was, we were sort of directly on the northwest of a cross junction that went from east to west and then south to north, pretty much exactly like that. But there was an area to the right, that to the direct east of us, it was called the Red Wedge. And the reason it was called the Red Wedge is because the way the ground broke down as you looked at it on the map, it kind of formed like a big V. So about 2 kilometres to the south of us was the start of the V, and it ran from south to north and south to east-west and really opened up towards a town called, or a little Calais, or small, which is a village essentially, called Nagelabad Calais. And that was kind of Taliban headquarters. They knew that they had a lot of freedom of movement in that sort of, in that ground, and they really utilised that, and they operated out of that town, and they moved first thing in the morning down in and around our compound, north, south and east and west, and basically utilised routes in and out that they used all the time to get in and take on our compound or take on our patrols. And as I said, within the first 2 weeks we had sort of 146 major engagements. It was very intense, let's say.
Were you within an artillery umbrella?
Basically, going out on patrol, I had in the patrol, the breakdown of it is I would have my lead man, who was the Valen man, who basically was carrying a metal detector, let's say, and it's called the Valen in military terms, and he would be point man because he would scan the ground with the Valen as he was patrolling. Then I would have a GPMG gunner, which is a 7.62 machine gun carried by an individual that can fire 700 rounds a minute at a rate of 25 rounds a minute, a normal rate of fire, and 100 rounds a minute at rapid. Then myself, the commander. Then directly behind me be the interpreter, because he's got what would be the ICOM scanner. So the ICOM scanner, essentially, that interpreter can listen to the Taliban talking on the radio, brief you in English exactly what they're saying, so you kind of know what's going on the ground, that they can see you, if they can't, if they're going to take action against you. So it gives you a little bit of a heads up, kind of a bit of a hairs on the back of your neck fix situation as well, because you kind of know that you're about to get ambushed, which is not great, but also it's great because you know you're about to get ambushed, so you're kind of mentally ready. And then behind him, I would have an MFC, mortar fire controller, and then behind him, in the patrol, I would have an artillery attachment from 7 Para RHA, who was attached with one of his signallers as well. And the reason for them is obviously mortars coming from company headquarters, very good asset to utilise if in a heavy engagement, which we were, and then artillery, obviously precision as well, with the 105 gun battery back in battalion headquarters, which is very, very efficient and utilised a lot, especially by my patrol. And then further back, more riflemen carrying certain equipment that we can't speak about, LMG gunners, i.e. light machine gunners, and then the rear end of the patrol for me would always be the Patrol 2 IC, and I'd have a Lance Corporal mixed somewhere in the middle there to be able to control fire as I was sort of dealing with the wider situation of the battle, communicating with company headquarters, managing casualties, whatever. So as an example then, the first major engagement we had a couple of small ones before, but to talk about the first one, the biggest one in the beginning, was we were literally out on patrol approximately 5 minutes. We left the compound, we crossed into the east of the canal, so over the main MSR into the east of the canal. We banked following it. You always stick close to irrigation ditches because if something happens, it provides a bit of the best piece of cover that you've got possible, because an irrigation ditch can be about 3 to 5 foot deep and quite wide, and quite slopey banks on it as well, which provides a good sort of position for you to be in if you're firing, returning fire, and also wide enough that you can move up and down it among your men if you need to. And as we came sort of between, there was like 2 compounds and broke out. There was a couple of compounds to the northeast of us, about 40 meters away. And we got opened up on by a massive, massive weight of fire. It was a killing group, essentially. So it was a planned ambush. It was very close kinetic battle. We took cover straight away and then started to try and positively identify where they were. We picked up or ID'd a couple of positions very close to us, and we started putting down, like, half the call sign was still behind the compound, and my front half was effectively pinned down. I had my point man, Andy, and the machine gunner, and Boydie, another guy who moved in front of me with an LMG, who put there trying to put a weight of fire down. I put Andy on flank protection, and basically 2 Taliban came round very quickly to our left side as I look at the enemy firing points to the right that we've been engaged from, and tried to fight through our position. So what they'd essentially done is decided that they'd have a killing group and then a kind of a cut-off that would come through rapidly and engage and try and take us out. Luckily, Andy was on it and opened fire on them. I'm not sure still to this day if he hit one, but they definitely kind of took cover and disappeared. And then we tried to peel right out of the engagement. So I basically gave the command for a rapid fire, basically, and then peel right, peel right, peel right. Everybody started to peel right. So Andy, then Boydie beyond me. But then as they broke out to the south as we were extracting, there was another killing group, 2 RPKs, so 7.62 machine guns. So what they'd done is what we do, as you guys remember being in the British Army, they laid out a perfectly set central killing group ambush with a left and right cut off with the intent of sort of, us trying to extract and getting caught out by one of these. So we went firm, and I basically just said to the company headquarters that we were pinned, we've been overmatched with fire, enemy fire, and what was going on. And then the artillery, the AK that was attached to me, called in 7 rounds danger close artillery. So basically we had 7 rounds of 105 coming on top of the killing group, danger close, 40 meters away, which was, you can imagine
an experience.
Oh yeah, the ground shook, lifted me off the ground a few times, and then there was just this silence. It was the most eerie feeling. Dust kind of started to settle, and obviously the enemy had been completely neutralized, and everything just fell completely silent. We just took a minute to catch my breath, look around, told the guys 50-50 change mags, all that, prepared to move. We're going to move back the way we came, the safe route, because we already know it's clear because we patrolled it as quick as possible back to the compound, which we were back in the compound in about 3.5 minutes. We were literally that close. So that was our first major engagement with the enemy, and it was they let us know, they gave us a welcome in a big way for sure.
Were you ever pushed to do any sort of battlefield damage assessment, or was it just too dangerous and you were never?
Definitely. I mean, I was very conscious about where we were, or where my guys were putting mortar rounds and artillery, and a couple of times I'd stop, cancelled out through the company commander, the MSC, if he decided he wanted to drop something on a compound we were being engaged from, because there's a moral piece to this always, and I knew that the Taliban would just go into a compound, take it over. There could be a family in there. There was that always in the back of my mind. I never ever once allowed that to happen. I just stopped it. And there's one time when we took a casualty, Aaron, the MFC wanted to drop a round on the compound where we were being engaged from, and I just said, basically put it on the outside of the compound, more of a distraction than anything, which we did instead. And that blast was enough to put the enemy off, for them to cease fire and begin their own extraction, which I think is important. You can utilize these weapon systems not just to neutralize and kill enemy, but also to put them off. Basically, you can call in fast air. We had emergency close air support, but I've not wanted to have them drop an ordnance. I've utilised them to fly low, hard and fast over the enemy positions, and that's enough for them to say, do you know what, let's live to fight another day and go back to wherever. And that worked, and there was that briefing to the guys before we went out on the ground. I think they called it
proportionality.
Yeah, courageous restraint was the term.
Yeah, that was General McChrystal.
That's the
he
one,
brought that in.
And I mean, you've got to be conscious as a commander, and even as the lowest level rifleman, about what you're doing. You might be in a battlefield, but you're still among populace, you're among communities, you're among families that are living in compounds, that have children, that have lives, that are trying to go about their lives as best as possible while this situation is going on around them. They're caught up in the middle of it. That doesn't, just because you're being in heavy engagements, doesn't mean that gives you the right to bypass their safety. So yeah, you try to be as conscious as possible and really think about what you're doing before you make decisions. That helps me sleep better at night now as well, knowing that I did everything possible as a commander to protect the people as well as my men.
Young soldiers take a lead from the likes of yourself as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about it, but there's a couple of situations that happened with people, men that I've seen, that unfortunately civilian did lose his life in one. And I think that moment of what happened, is total accident, but the bit that led up to it happening could have not happened, and that person for sure still now loses a lot of sleep over it. And that's what I mean about that as well. You have to be aware of the ramifications of every action that you take, and not only because of what it can do to people, but because of what you as a person have to be aware of, that you will have to handle and manage and know for the rest of your life that you did that, and it affects people in a really bad way, especially those that make the wrong decision. So yeah, so that was kind of the first engagement. The second one I want to talk about really was the first casualty, Aaron. This was a young lad who was a sniper. So in one of the patrol actions before, 2 of the guys in another ambush got shot in the body armor. They were all right, but they couldn't go out on patrol. There was some slight bruising, so wasn't taking my sniper Aaron out. I was utilising him for top cover, oversight and stuff, but at that stage I had no option. So his first patrol out, unfortunately, Aaron became a casualty. But yeah, he came out and he went out as the point man. And this particular time, the 2IC was on as company commander or standing company commander while the OC was resting. And he told us to do a patrol to the southeast. It became kind of evident that the east of our area was definitely very, very red. You definitely wanted always some kind of depth when you went into there, or another platoon in close proximity, because the numbers of enemy in there they could get close to what you had on the ground, and you always want to kind of think about having a 3-to-1 situation when you're taking the enemy on or going into an area. And yourselves, as you build up the intelligence over time, you start to understand the area, the situation. That dictates essentially how many people or men you send out onto the ground, or how many call signs, in order to make sure you have got that ability to, one, either take them on if you need to, or get yourselves out of there comfortably by having mutual support. And mutual support is something that was banged into us for years in the military, especially in the Northern Ireland days. So yeah, we went out on patrol, we headed south. There was another platoon that had come out from that platoon house to the west, as I said, and they were sort of operating just north of where we were going when we headed south. I remember sort of looking to my left and seeing an individual kind of look at us and drop his rate at the time as we left the compound and move off out of sight, and it kind of stuck in my mind, and I thought, that guy definitely 100% is just conducting recce, and he's sort of blending in. He disappeared, and we moved down, and we kind of got to the bottom of this sort of on the east side of the canal at the end of a compound, and there was a sort of a natural crossing point that we wanted to get back across the canal onto the west side of it, putting us south of our compound, with the ability to sort of clockwise direction work our way up through the fields and irrigation ditches back towards our compound. So that was kind of the set route that I planned for that patrol. Unfortunately, so what happened was I put a gunner out covering to the east, and then basically said to Aaron, move yourself across. And the minute he got up and exposed himself, he took a burst of machine gun fire through the legs and fell. And he fell right into the middle of the highest piece of the part of the ground. So he was laid and he was in agony, but he was exposed as well. We kind of had only had a very small part of our patrol out, exposed and able to put fire down. So I ordered the men to peel right along the irrigation ditch in order to get more weapon systems firing onto those enemy positions that had engaged us as we had identified them. And Aaron sort of rolled himself into the canal. I think he just looked for a piece of cover, saw that was it. He wasn't enjoying the fact he was getting shot at, let alone the fact that he'd had 2 rounds through the leg, 7.62. But unfortunately, he rolled himself into a canal that was about 5 foot deep and fast flowing. I try not to go into too much detail, but Aaron started drowning and it became a big problem straight away. So I grabbed Chris, the medic, by the scruff of his neck, said, come with me. And we both ran and jumped into the canal with all our kit on, and we're submerged. And I got Jay Orsey to control the battle from a firefight perspective. And we quickly saw that Aaron had a catastrophic hemorrhage to the leg, and we had to deal with that. I obviously was stood in the water giving a contact report and also a CAS rep. A CAS rep is a casualty report when you're essentially giving what we called a 9-liner, and you're going through a series of steps where you're briefing the company headquarters on the state of the casualty, how serious it is, what priority is. And he was a Cat Alpha, which is categorized as the highest priority because of the catastrophic hemorrhage to the leg, the fact that his femur had been broken into multiple pieces. So yeah, basically we controlled the bleed, put a tourniquet on him, and we got a couple of the guys to help us drag him out of this canal. And as I'm stood now, I can look up, I can see still the canal was like fully arm's length to the top to pull myself out of it. So getting Aaron out, quite a job. And then what we had to contend with was getting him across the road and then into another ditch, which we quickly found out was knee-deep mud, and then across a field which was about just between knee and ankle-deep wet mud, to a HLS site that I'd spotted, and also at the same time a firefight going on, and me trying to take some of those guys and formulate all-round protection for the HLS. I really did think about this in that moment. There was a range I was on in Warcup years and years ago, and I remember thinking, it can't be like this. It was horrible. It was a Kazivac. I was knee deep in mud and I was blowing out of my backside, and I thought, it'll never be like this. And in that moment, it was worse. And I'd actually thought about that day on that range. In that moment, I was dragging Aaron through the mud and thinking, God, all right, fair enough. And that's so.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, that
Yeah.
you can have all the high-tech equipment in the world, but for an infantryman or a dismounted soldier, fitness is still
It's the
top priority, isn't it?
Definitely. I mean, I prided myself on my fitness. Quite a lot of my guys did, but you need to be robust and very fit and strong in that environment, especially. You're operating at altitude, which is another important factor. But yeah, so we popped the smoke, 2 Apaches rocked up, cleared the area, which made the enemy firing drop down, and then the Chinook came in. These guys can land a Chinook. A Chinook is obviously the double-rotored helicopter that part of the MERTS, so the Medical Emergency Response Team, that deploys out to pick up casualties on the ground. And that landed on a sixpence. We put Aaron on, said goodbye, got out, and then patrolled back as quick as we could to Platoon House when that helicopter had left. The one phase I want to talk about with this is, as a commander on the ground, there's a certain element of loneliness in these moments, because what you have to do is you have to get it back, keep the guys out, get them to get a brew. The first thing you need to do is go and collapse that guy's kit, collapse his bed, collapse all his photos of his family, put it in a bag, put it in your room, go out to the guys, then go through the debrief, which is sit down, have a tea, have a cigarette, talk to the guys about what happened, get them to explain different phases of it, and really get them to kind of open up about it. And then you send people back into their routine of cleaning weapons, cooking rations, whatever. And I think as a commander, there's that you've always got to be, there's a line, isn't there, between you and the men, always. And you've got to be a certain way, and you've got to keep your emotions in check always, and just be kind of, I don't know how I always wondered how did I come across to them when I wasn't really talking emotionally to them about stuff, because you'd hear the guys talking about it to each other, but you try and distance yourself from that to be able to still be effective as a commander. And somebody has to take responsibility for the mental state of the patrol and making sure that there's no outside things that can impact on that. And one part of that is removing every trace of an individual when they become a casualty or get killed.
Did you do much trauma training before you went out?
Trim,
obviously the introduced Trim, if you remember, and
I mean,
across all the ranks, really did go hard over with Trim.
I would say it wasn't a lot. It was a couple of briefs. Let's say it was one on pre-deployment, and there was one by one of the Trim practitioners who was one of the company sergeant majors before we deployed, and he was talking about the brain being a bank, and you can take so much money out until your brain's skint, and that was it really. And I think this was kind of probably the beginnings years of that process starting to really come into place. So,
but what you described there, Adam, was Trim in effect.
Yeah,
you're going round, you're getting the guys to talk about it, getting off the chest.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, for me, I've always thought that you need, if they express and talk about it there and collectively share their viewpoint on it, they immediately start to realise that everyone else was there, everybody else saw it, everybody else how they felt about it. The younger lads would definitely talk about how they felt about it with a cigarette in their mouths, and in that immediate moment, by doing that, you don't pause that traumatic situation for them, but you enable them to move on from it.
Yeah, you process it
during the tour. Yeah, I mean later. Yeah. There's much more addressing of that to be dealt with when they get home, but you want to keep them effective battlefield. That's the most important thing. Not trying to sound too cold, but as a unit, you need to be efficient. So yeah, and there's also being conscious of the long-term ramifications of what it can do in post-traumatic stress and stuff like that. So there's that. So we basically were we were sort of engaged continuously, became kind of overbearing at one point, to the point where we were just always in an engagement. We had the special forces, the SAS, dispatched one of their snipers out to us to conduct some reconnaissance, to spend time with us as they were looking at our area for an ops box, because it was unworkable at this stage. And he came out, and his experience was, he was very much in shock. The time that he was with us, we went out on a patrol to the south, we got engaged, we extracted to the north, we got engaged 3 times, we got ambushed in one patrol, and we were literally at no point more than 200 meters away from the compound. And then the last part, we got pinned down from north to south by omnidirectional ambush. And what he was doing is, because he'd bought his sniper rifle, he was up with one of my guys in the Sanger, and we were like, right, they're getting engaged from the south. So he was running to the south Sanger from the north Sanger, getting in there. Guys have extracted, they've been engaged from the north, and he was like, for God's sake, and he was climbing down the ladder, running back to the north Sanger, getting up in that, trying to engage. And then by that point, we'd we'd moved into cover. And I got back in and I said, "What's your analysis?" And he just looked at me and he went, "You guys are really under the cosh here, aren't you?" He said, "We'll have to do something about this." And that was it really.
There's a sort of a principle applied to tanks and armoured vehicles: firepower, protection, and mobility. And they normally say pick any two. Looking at, you're describing your patrol makeup, you had GPMG gunners, you had body armour. I'd probably say you had the firepower and the protection from the body armour. That would degrade the mobility. Do you think body armour was more of a hindrance out there and you'd been better off with that mobility, or do you think the body armour was useful? Bear in mind the kinetic environment you're in.
The body armour was useful because, from experience, the side plates especially, so the side plates were essentially the old Northern Ireland front and back plates, and then you had the front plate, the back plate, the side plates, and then you had the Kevlar flexible body armour underneath that inside this, and your magazine pouches or whatever attached to either your body armour or a belt rig. But I saw guys get shot in the side plates, 2 guys in one patrol, and it saved their lives. It went through the magazine and into the side plate, 7.62 rounds in both cases. And that was enough for me to think, we need this. It's essential. It's saving lives. What is the burden? And it's not a burden, it's a necessity, is the amount of load you're carrying. You've got a radio, spare batteries. Each guy's carrying 300 or 400 7.62 link, which is heavy enough. Then you've got your 5.56 link extras for the LMG gunners. You've got magazines, 10 magazines a man. You've got grenades, you've got smoke grenades, you've got underslung grenades, you've got ways of.
What do you reckon you were carrying?
£100, £90
Yeah,
patrol. Yeah, I mean, getting up off of your knee on patrol was hard. But there's this, when you get engaged, the adrenaline that you feel carries you. You become very strong and fit for a short period of time because you're in danger. As an example, the handover patrol. So basically, the company headquarters said after I think 6 weeks or so, we're going to rip you out. We're going to send you to Mazroof. So Mazroof platoon house is to the north, which was at the top of the top of the green zone, right on the apex of the desert. That platoon is going to come down and relief in place with you because you guys have been hammered and we want you to have a break from combat. It's quite a funny story, this. My guys went out. He came in with his guys after he spent 24 hours with me. His guys came in rather. I took him out on patrol. We got in a massive ambush straight away. It was a sustained engagement. The A&A were involved with us as well. I had one of my medics, from the other patrol that had come down to join us, got pinned against the wall and he froze because as we were sort of patrolling, basically, we were patrolling back towards our compound, between 2 compounds, and we got engaged from the rear, from the southeast somewhere. And it was like this moment of you don't know where it's coming from. And even I sort of stood and left and had this sort of weird jumpy on my feet moment as I tried to figure out where I needed to go. And we all suddenly moved to the irrigation ditch just in front of us, like 10 meters away, formed the baseline, started returning fire. And I looked half right and I saw Tom, the medic, kind of frozen, like the silhouette, the white lines they used to put around a comedy dead body like that against the wall, not moving at all. And you could see the rounds hitting the wall where they were shooting at him. And he was froze there for a good 1.5 minutes until we got one of the guys to go over and grab him, effing come with me, and pull him back to us. And we put enough fire down for that to be able to happen. And that traumatized him for the rest of that one situation, completely wiped him out for the rest of the tour. He was mentally gone straight away. It was enough, and I can imagine what that can do to somebody. He didn't know what to do. It's his first major engagement for him, and it was a big one. And that was also a bit of me. I said to the commanders who went back in the compound, "Well, there's your handover patrol, mate. What do you think?" And he just looked at me and was like, "I'll see you in 6 weeks. You'll probably be coming back to rip me out again." And I actually went up that day with company headquarters round to Mazroof after I'd left, and I got into Mazroof, and there'd been no engagements there at all, not one. As the company headquarters left, that platoon house got engaged by multiple firing positions. I think that one engagement we counted 17 firing points, heavy.
Just as you turned up?
Honest to God, you couldn't have timed it any better. And I remember the company commander was obviously in the vehicle and he could hear the rate of fire. In that engagement went on for a couple of hours. We fired 13,762. We had 6 GPMGs engaging positions in all directions. We were taking a heavy weight of fire. The 2 guys
starting to get a better name for yourself when people want you to come to the position.
I remember the company commander on the company net screaming, "You're going to destabilize the whole town." And I was thinking, what do you want me to do about it? You want to talk to the Taliban, so it's nothing to do with me, So, and that was a big engagement, and that was kind of, I think what they'd done is they'd spent some time focusing on Shingle, and they'd bought the Galabad Calais was literally just 1.5 kilometers east of this patrol base, and they decided to focus on that at some point. It just conveniently happened to be the same day that I kind of went into there. We sort of then, that became a focal point as well. So you had Shingle that was a focal point, and you had our platoon house that was a massive focal point, and that was being engaged by day and by night. So in that platoon house, we had a compound that we were in, which was quite a large compound, multiple buildings inside, that was at the almost the apex of the town on the northeast. But directly across from us, there'd been a super sanger built from the engineers. It was very high. It was, you know, it was 30, 40 foot high super sanger. They'd built enough to get a full section in, to get eyes on in depth was essentially the way they decided to build it. But unfortunately, the lay of the land, the way the engineers built the HESCO around it, it dropped down on the east side. So essentially all the ground to the east could see into the entire compound. So the guys were going up on patrol, up on stag, were all right to a certain point, but then the enemy started engaging the guys with machine gun fire that were going on stag to relieve the other guys. So we had to build what was called a rat run, which is basically flattened HESCO with 6-foot pickets and build like a chicane rat run down into the dead ground so that the guys could walk up onto stag without getting opened up on. So yeah, it was very, and they bought in a recoilless rifle, which, as you guys know, is a heavy round, a big, massive rifle, basically, that can fire a heavy projectile. And they were utilising a recoilless rifle at night onto the Sanger. They were opening up on the Super Sanger machine gun fire at night. In the day, one of the guys got hit in the body, in the helmet, in the body armour. And there was, I remember being asleep and waking up to a massive weight of fire. Ran straight away. A young platoon commander that had been put in with this platoon as well, under me, brand new pretty much, Nathan Reed, great guy, still friends to this day with Nathan. He was in the little control room, and I, again, as soon as I got there as part of my takeover, I put radios to talk to company headquarters in every little Sanger or little watchtower. I got up to the Sanger, and the two guys were laid down in the Sanger on the floor screaming, and there was basically the amount of fire that had hit the watchtower they were in had deteriorated most of the protection, so they were literally just laying down, and there was rounds like missing them by inches. The only thing that could be done was just to get in there and motivate them to get up and fight, and the way to do that was to get on the gun and identify a position and start putting a weight of fire down, and also take control of the other positions we had on the personal row radio and start to give fire control orders and really start to try and organise what was going on a bit better. Have somebody down below running ammunition round to different ones like magazines and whatever, to keep the battle going and to keep us getting a sustained weight of fire down, but to also motivate the men beyond fear, because that was a massive engagement. There was a heavy weight of fire on us, and that was Chris the medic and Andy who's not here anymore in that situation. And that night, got everybody down, got everybody in. We went up and we rebuilt that, and I moved that position and made it an extra depth of protection and moved it more central, and went and checked all the defensive positions and reinforced everything, tried to give a bit more protection and a bit more of a lack of silhouette in each of those towers overnight. But then one of the guys, I won't say his name in case he listens, but one of the guys came to me that night, an attachment, and broke down into tears, and he was beyond bringing him back. He was gone mentally, completely. He just said, I can't anymore. He fell on the floor at my feet and he was completely broken. And I tried pull him round, and I could see that he needed medical help. He was at a point where his trauma was that intense that he had to be extracted immediately and put into probably a hospital. Basically, it was that severe. So I had him extracted the very next morning by company headquarters. We speak sometimes. I think still now he's affected. Definitely got heavy PTSD. And
there's no real training for that, is there?
No. I mean, what had happened in Mazroof was there was a series of massive engagements and ambushes that led up to that. One situation was we had to go out because there was an IED found on the road near just south of that Nagalabad Calais that I spoke about, and there was battle group quick reaction force which was formed of the tank regiment, elements of our company that had gone out to support them. So you had kind of 7 armoured vehicles stuck on the road, MSR, but not being engaged yet because of an IED. So definitely with the Galabad Calais being there, it was a come on, right, for sure. So what they were waiting for, now I look back at it, was dismounted troops, because shooting at armoured vehicles with RPGs and 7.62, you're not going to do that much damage. So we got told to go out from Mazroof and put out some depth protection for them to be able to get ATO out, detonate the device, whatever. So we got near them. We had to back out of an area because we came across 3 IEDs perfectly laid out. It was like they'd set it. The way I look at it is they set those 3 IEDs by looking at the ground and saying, right, what's that patrol going to do? It's going to go there. Okay, they're going to find that. Okay, so what are they going to do? They're going to back up there and go that way. Right, put an IED in there. But what if they find that? They might go there. And they literally did that. And as we followed our tactics, we hit all 3 of those IEDs, found it, luckily, and then backed. I said, guys, back 300 meters, let's do a proper dogleg around this. And we did that, and we eventually got out to the call sign and moved to the north of them, coming round, and we were going to get ourselves in the canal near them and provide some sort of protection there. But as we were moving across to the canal, the whole call sign got caught in the open, and that it was a well prepared ambush. There was a massive weight of fire. It was about platoon strength, I think, that took us on. A couple of the guys in the front end, we fire maneuvered, but the rest of the patrol just hit the ground and laid down. And the problem we had was they were just being shot at by a heavy weight of fire. And then we had over our shoulders, we had 7 armored vehicles that just began to PID fire positions and open up. So we're talking underslung grenade launchers, a couple of 50 cal machine guns, GPMGs, weight of fire going each way that was really, really intense. And I was trying to put my head up to ID where the guys were to try and get myself across a bit to get them under control and bring them back. And every time I put my head up, I was getting shot at by a sharpshooter. So I think he identified my antenna, that I was the ground commander, was trying to take me out. And guys kept shouting at me every time I put my head up, because sometimes I didn't hear the round because I was so focused on trying to, control the rest of my multiple and get them to fire and maneuver down, and shouting at them across to them, that you kind of get tunnel vision and you don't hear when somebody's really shooting at you. And the guys were like, get the FNL down, lads. Like, one of them came over and pulled me down and said, just stay the hell down, like you're about to get your head took off, mate. And that was a mad situation, and it went on for well over an hour, of that. We finally got the guys back into cover. We, in the end, ended up mounting in the vehicles and moving away from that situation back to battalion headquarters. And then from there, I got sort of moved back with my patrol back to Mazroof. All that there was a lot more engagements, but those were the major key ones that really stand out to me. And that was the before phase of when we started to decide as a company or as a battle group, right, this area needs to become an ops box, and we need to start pushing out into the Red Wedge and doing company operation, dominating the ground and getting in the face of the enemy, and, doing advance to contact and that kind of thing. And that's the next phase that really started to happen.
That's it for the first of a 2-part podcast, with the second part being out next week. Thanks to Adam for coming on the podcast, and to you, the listener, for your continued support and suggestions. Please keep them coming in, and our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes. You can find us on all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. And if you've downloaded us from iTunes or Spotify and liked the podcast, it would be great if you could leave us a review there or anywhere you get your podcasts from. Thanks again to Nick Beale for his continued support and sponsorship to the series, and offering technical support through his company ISAR. See you next time on The Unconventional Soldier.